Hello there.
You know what I've come for. This is the way.
I am a Jedi, like my father before me.
Hello and welcome back to The Pod Awakens. My name is Jordan Wiegand, and I have General Logan Stump.
What's going on?
And Commander Matt Hartgrove.
How's everybody doing?
And you guys can fight amongst yourself on which one of those ranks is higher.
Jedi Master.
That's me. Sorry, I forgot to introduce myself like that. So we are going to be breaking down episode 3 or chapter 3 of The Mandalorian season 1. But before we do that, something that happened between us recording 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 is that we got an official date for the return of The Mandalorian. Season 2 comes out October 30th with its first episode. And it's, again, 8 episodes long, which means it probably puts us around December 18th, I think people have said. So we will have pretty much content, until the 18th, up until the week of Christmas, pretty much, with this. And then I guess we'll see if WandaVision is ready to go for more new content for Disney+. They also released some first images of the season. Not really much new in those. You know, you get to see the Mandalorian riding a land speeder with Baby Yoda in his little satchel hanging on the side of the car. So that's side of the speeder. So looks like we're still going to get some good stuff. The return of Greef, but this time with a white beard instead of his dark black mustache. And some more Cara Dune. Cool. Yeah.
I love the goatee. I saw that photo. I was like, he looks sick.
And it made me question myself too if he had white facial hair in season 1. I had to go back and look. I was like, is this how he always looked? Because people were commenting on it, but I was like, yeah, that's Greef. Like, I didn't even think about it, you know? I'm like, that there he is. So it didn't really strike me as different. It's supposed to pick up right from where we left off in episode 8, which we'll get to in a few weeks here. But it is interesting.
That photo has to be like episodes in then, because that'd be such a weird continuity thing. Because he doesn't have a goatee, does he? At the end of season 1?
No, he doesn't. I think we might start right off after episode 8, and then I think there might be a time skip at some point. Kind of like how Endgame picked right up from Infinity War, but then they do 5 years later. So I think it might be something like that. Well, let's get into it. Chapter 3, The Sin. This aired on November 22nd, 2019 on Disney+. Created by Jon Favreau, written by Jon Favreau, and directed by Deborah Chow. Music by, as always, the great Ludwig Göransson. Here's our little summary. The Mandalorian delivers the child to the client. He asks about the plans for the child, but is given no answer. He receives his new armor from the armorer, and he decides to turn back and get the child, and he comes up against the rest of the guild. So we're going to break that down even more here, but the summary that Wikipedia provides is two paragraphs, and I just shortened that down to like 2 sentences. So here we go. It starts off in space. Kind of the whole point of Star Wars. Baby Yoda wants the knob on the lever, little ball that you can unscrew from the lever. That's when Greef calls in and tells Mando where to go. He tells him to go right to the client, deliver the child, It's all good. And we land on Navarro, which is the planet that the guild and the client are on. One thing I want to point out here too is I just love the creatures and the aliens as he's walking down the aisle, like the alleyway, to the client's base with the child. The child is looking at all these people like, what's going on? But also, it was just nice to see so many different creatures and aliens that we would typically see in a movie, but was kind of limited in the first 2 episodes. We kind of saw it in the first episode in the cantina when he starts the whole fight on the ice planet. But this, gave us lots of good views of some of these creatures and aliens, and even some familiar type of aliens, which for me was just great. It really made me feel like this is Star Wars, and it, even to this day, watching it just felt so crazy that we were watching Star Wars on television. Did anything jump out of you guys in these first few scenes here, Logan? Anything before we get to the client? Anything that you wanted to note?
No, I just love the interactions, and again, like it's so telling. His face, like he's got no facial expression, but his like body language when Baby Yoda's playing around with the spaceship kills me. I love him. The child's fantastic, and just the interaction. What's the actor? I always forget the actor's name that plays Mando.
Pedro Pascal.
Yeah, he does such a great job of just body language and picking up on that body language. It's so great because it just tells you what's going on in his head without even having to say anything.
And a lot of that, too, is there was a stunt guy that does Mandalorian stuff where sometimes Pedro Pascal wasn't on set. So it would be like a stunt guy underneath of there. And he just brings, whoever's under there at any time just brings that body language. It's a lot of head movements. It's a lot of shoulder movements, because that's how you can convey what's going on when you can't see somebody's, face. Matt, anything in these first few scenes before we get to the client? Because this next scene is one of my favorites.
No, not really. I think I was more excited to get to the point where they were getting to the client to kind of see where the next steps in the show were going to take. Because then you were going to start seeing how the story was going to progress, and maybe even find out why the asset was getting taken to the client. So I was really excited just to see, once he meets back up with them, how he was going to react and what was going to happen next. So I was just looking more forward to the next scene.
All right, so let's talk about that next scene. Mando comes into the client. He gives over the child, and Dr. Pershing, who is the doctor with, like the young guy with the glasses, he is in there scanning Baby Yoda. And Mandalorian's still kind of pissed off about the how many bounty hunters were sent after this. He thought he, was one of the only ones to have the fob here. He says, how many fobs were given out? The client kind of just shrugs it off and says, yeah, it doesn't really matter. Like, you're the one that got it, and here you go. Here's the steel, and he presents him with the Beskar steel. And I love this. Jon Favreau wrote this, and I think his writing for Werner Herzog was just great, and Werner's delivery was great. I mean, listen to some of these lines. Such a large bounty for such a small package. Just the way Werner delivered that was great. Mando then still asks, what are you going to do with it? And, Werner, the client, responds with, is it not the code of the guild that these events are now forgotten? That Beskar is enough to make a handsome replacement for your armor. Unfortunately, finding a Mandalorian in these trying times is more difficult than finding the steel. And that really stuck out to me. I eat up everything that Werner Herzog says anyway in this show. But this really spoke to me because, it's like we've seen Mando, just kind of whoop a whole bunch of ass in some of these episodes. And you have the client who doesn't look all that thrilling. right? Like he's old, right? He's not looking like Mando or somebody that's intimidating like Darth Vader or anything, but he's still kind of almost taking a dig or almost threatening Mando here with, you know, the Beskar's enough for your whole replacement of your armor pretty much. And unfortunately, finding a Mandalorian is more rough than finding the steel, you know, and him pretty much, I took that as a threat. What do you think, Logan? Is he kind of threatening him here?
Yeah, I think they have that weird like standoff, almost like it's almost like we'll wipe you off the earth if we really need to get to that point. And Mando just, you can tell there's just that tension in the room just because it pans back and forth between like the stormtroopers and then back to him and then back to Mando, and then it's like this weird standoff. And after that, Jordan, I love that quote that you pulled out. Just basically saying that we can get rid of you quickly if we really need to.
All right, then we finally get the title card. So this is like 9 minutes in. We finally get the title card here. And Mando, you know, walks away pretty much at this point. Matt, so at this point then, you said you wanted to see what happens with the client and all of that and the storyline. Did you think that was it? Because I kind of almost thought like, okay, are we done with Baby Yoda? He's got to go back and get Baby Yoda. But what was your thought process on that? Did you think maybe we're moving on to another storyline after this, or what was your thoughts?
You're asking me about the Baby Yoda, right? I'm sorry, I have poor connection, so that was going in and out. I just want to make sure I heard you right.
No. Yeah, I was just saying, did you think that, you know, after Mando left Baby Yoda there, that he was going to go back, or did you think maybe we're approaching a new storyline in the show?
I think the way that Mando starts, Mando questioning what he's doing with Baby Yoda, I think is key to seeing that he knows what the guild is. Like, he knows that he's supposed to forget it. But for some reason, in the 2 episodes prior, this Baby Yoda has somehow, like, gotten through to Mando to make him have this caring sense to him. So I kind of figured even after he gave Baby Yoda over to the client, it just didn't really seem like that was going to be the end of it, because you could see Mando, he wanted to know, like, whether it was he was worried about Baby Yoda or he was just super intrigued. I think he was more worried than anything. So I think it kind of shows a little soft spot he had already for him. And so I think without knowing what was going to happen, I just don't think he would have been able to leave and go off on whatever his next mission was going to be. I think he had to either save him or know that he was going to be okay because of just the little cues he was having at the very initial speaking to the client and speaking to Grief. Like, he wants to know what's happening, and he knows it's not something he's supposed to ask, but he's still doing it anyway. And so he wasn't going to let it go. He was going to go back either to find out or to save him.
So we get the Mandalorian. He goes back to the Enclave, or the COVID. Not COVID. That's what's going on right now. The Covern, or whatever they call it, for the where the armor is. He gets his new armor. A few other Mandalorians show up there as well and start talking to him. They're kind of pissed that he has this Beskar steel that has the Imperial logo kind of burned into it. They're trying to, this is, the one guy says, who's voiced by Jon Favreau, says this is spoils of the Great Purge, which I'm assuming happened sometime after Clone Wars and before The Mandalorian, or before. It had to happen sometime after his age, because so they ask him, have you ever removed your helmet? He says no, right? And they say this is the way, and all that stuff. But when you look at Star Wars as a whole, Mandalorians are typically not so beholden to the whole, we have to keep our helmet on all the time or else you can't wear it again. But I'm assuming this is some sort of offshoot of the Mandalorian culture after the Clone Wars and after Darth Maul had taken control of Mandalore and all that stuff. I feel like there's a whole different offshoot of that. I don't think it's just a continuity error like some think, because Dave Filoni has worked on both shows. So I think that this is something that the Great Purge happens afterwards, and that's when the Mandalorians kind of get almost defeated by the Empire, and they start branding the steel, and they are using it as currency almost. And maybe this offshoot of this little small number of Mandalorians are the ones that do not remove their helmets. So that'd be interesting to see if there's any, movement on that in season 2. Because if the rumors are correct and we get some of these people that are listed as showing up in season 2 of The Mandalorian, they're going to have to address it, because one of those people is a Mandalorian who often removed her helmet. Both of the people that are rumored, both of the girls the women have removed their helmets in plenty of time. So I think that's something that'll have to be addressed this season, if it's just like a little, I don't know, like family, like part of his signet, I guess, before he gets his own, have removed their helmets, or no longer remove their helmets. So the armor says, what happened to your armor? Pretty much, like he's kind of beat up from the mudhorn still, and they say, well, then the mudhorn should be your signet, right? And he says, no, it wasn't a noble kill. And the armor asks, how come? And he says, my enemy helped me. And I love this exchange here, because then she says, well, why would your enemy help you? And he says, well, they did not know they were my enemy. He's talking about Baby Yoda, of course, who saved him. So I think at this point, he's kind of trying to frame it as Baby Yoda was his enemy. He never really was, obviously. He even tried healing him. Not that the Mandalorian understands that at this time. But I think this is him trying to justify why he left Baby Yoda still at this point. How about you, Logan? You think him saying he's my enemy is to try to justify why he's leaving him with Dr. Pershing and the client?
Yeah, I think, like, I don't know. When you're talking about Mando, I think he does things I think he does things where like he's got like this internal conflict kind of thing going on, and I think when he's talking to Mando, you can see his hesitation. You can see Mando's hesitation with the child, giving him up and leaving him. It's just really tough for him, and I think you can see that throughout. It's always interesting because like when you're looking at Mandalorian and you're looking at him talking to the different, whenever he goes through the stages and talks to different people, whether it's grief or whatever, whoever it might be, he's talking about, you can kind of see that conflict within his head. And I think that's, ultimately where it ends up.
Matt, your thoughts? Is he justifying why he left him so he doesn't feel guilty for leaving the child with these awful people?
Yeah, I mean, it's because I still think it goes back to he has a soft spot for Baby Yoda, and I don't think that's something he feels like he should have. So he's trying to convince not only them, but honestly himself, that not going back and leaving him is the correct thing to do. And I mean, it's one of those things where somebody tries their best to convince themselves that they're doing the right thing, even though in his head he knows in a way that he really needs to go back and save Baby Yoda, even though it goes against everything he's pretty much ever been taught at that point. And so he's not only trying to convince them, but he's really trying to convince himself more than anyone that he doesn't need to go back, and that he's now got to just forget it and move on.
All right. So The armor says that she can make some whistling birds. That's kind of foreshadowing of something later. We're not really sure what that means at that point. We get some more flashbacks, just like we did in episode 1. We kind of get a little further of seeing his parents put him into this little, what's it called? Like a little bunker, and closing the door. And then the super battle droid, opening the door and getting ready to fire, and it cuts off. And then he walks into the cantina with his new armor, and he tells Greef he wants his next job, right? He just wants to move on to the next job. Greef has some great exchanges here about how he can take him to some Twi'leks, bathhouses and stuff like that. The Mando, takes the next job. He starts to leave on his Razor Crest, and he sees that the little knob is missing on the lever, and he picks it up and he screws it back on, and that's kind of when he realizes that he needs to go back. Right? This is that moment where he says, "I cannot leave this child with those people," and I think part of that is just the innocence of the child with playing with that little ball or knob or whatever, makes him realize this guy's not my enemy. He couldn't really hurt me, he likes me, he's not going to hurt me. I can't let them experiment on this little kid, even if he's 50 years old. I got to go get him back. On his way to the client, he goes around to the garbage. I think this is either behind there or around the alley. And we see that little hovercraft cradle that he rides in is in the trash. And then I put here in my notes, it's time for some badass Mando now. So, he knocks on the door. The little security droid that's an eye pops out, and he just rips the eye off of the droid, which causes the troopers to come out. He's already around back blowing a hole in the wall, and he's hiding, and he takes down those troopers. Then he comes across the child and Dr. Pershing, and he shoots the probe droid that's going to do something. He asks, what did you do to him? And Dr. Pershing says, I protected him. Right? He said, if it wasn't for me, I kept him alive. Right? He would be dead if it wasn't for me. What is Dr. Pershing's goal here? What are they trying to extract Logan? And what do you think the client, who are they working for? What is the goal here? Because there's a theory I'm going to bring up here in a second that I found online that premiered right after the first episode, I think. But what are your thoughts? Who's contracting the client out for this? Who is what's the goal? What are they extracting? What are they getting from the child?
I think, in this all, I think I was listening to a recap of episode 4, which is the next one we're doing. But when I was reading, listening to the one in episode 4, they were mentioning what on earth, who wants him? Why do they want Baby Yoda? He is a small child. What are they trying to extract the fact that the Force is still around, or are they trying to figure out what creatures are Force sensitive? I honestly think it's somebody's broken off from somebody's broken off from that, the Empire. And I think, one rumor was Palpatine. I don't know, as far it seems like such a long way away. And if Baby Yoda's gonna die, right? I mean, he doesn't show up in the rest of the movies. He doesn't show up anywhere. You would think that if Palpatine knew he was alive, maybe he's going to use him to stay alive or whatever he does in the final movie. But I don't know. It's really confusing because that's the only person that I could think of that the Emperor is using him, and he's still alive, and that's who wants that information because he's weak, because he just got thrown off the ship. I mean, I don't know. I whenever I watch this, and it's funny because the first season doesn't really give you any answers onto who it is. That's what I think they want. I think somebody from that broken off empire, well, they want the information, like who is this? Why does the Force still exist with this creature? But other than that, I'm still not sure exactly what they want with him.
So if you haven't watched the whole season, press the skip button on your thing for 30 seconds, because I'm going to just say, I think some people think maybe Moff Gideon I think it's kind of implied he's behind the client in that final episode of the show for season 1, but it still doesn't really give us an answer, really, I guess, what they're using the child for. Like you said, some people did suspect, Palpatine was behind it. But that's interesting. Do you think that if Palpatine knew that Baby Yoda would be dead, or are you trying to say that for sure Baby Yoda is dead by the time of The Force Awakens?
I'm saying he's dead by the time. I think the whole thing is Palpatine, and maybe he thinks, Luke and them are destroyed. I don't know. Like, I think maybe if Palpatine thinks that Luke's the only Jedi, and then they have this creature out there that he's figured out exists, and he doesn't want a Yoda Part 2. Like, it's really confusing. Like, I don't know what they want with him. And obviously what you said, there's different characters that have different things, but I don't see the point in wanting the child. I can't figure it out. But I think it does have something to do with somebody from the Empire.
That's interesting. I think Baby Yoda is alive and well of the time of the sequel trilogy, and I think that I think that opens up a good possibility for moving forward with that character for hundreds of years in the Star Wars universe, since we know Yoda can live till 900. So I think he'll be fine. But here's the theory I was going to talk about. So Dr. Pershing has a mark on his shoulder, according to people that have been able to sleuth this. It's not very clear in the episode, I don't think, or in the, but you can kind of see it. But it looks like 2 lines on a little patch, and people say that this is the logo that is on Jango and all the clones. Like all the clones on Kamino have this logo. Let me go ahead and just share my screen real quick for anybody that wants to see this. If you can see this, this little logo here that's on their shoulders. They say you can kind of see part of it here on his shoulder. So some people think that it has something to do with cloning, that it has to do, that Dr. Pershing is some sort of Kamino cloner or another sort of cloner, because he's obviously human and not Kamino, not from Kamino. So that is interesting. I'm not sure if they're, some people think that means it's a Yoda clone. I don't think that's the case. But maybe they were trying to clone him. Or like you said, maybe they're trying to use some of his life force for, Palpatine coming back. Any thoughts, Matt, on why they want him or who wants him and what they're trying to get from him?
Honestly, if I have to be completely honest, when I was watching it, my only thought was that they clearly want to know what Yoda is made up of. So I'm not gonna lie, I didn't really, especially the first time I watched it, I didn't really think too much about it. And even now, I don't have like any decent, I guess, or detailed thoughts on what it could be. I think a lot of it just has to do, my personal opinion is that it has to do with the species itself, because obviously we don't know a lot about his species. And I guess we don't really know how much people in the Star Wars world do fully know about the species. But really, the only thing I could really think about was they just want to learn more about what the species is. Are they all force sensitive? What's going on with them? And then honestly, that's all I've pretty much thought about it.
Well, no, that's a good point, to be honest, because even in the Star Wars universe, very little is known about Yoda's species or home world or anything like that. So it could be that they just, hey, he's 50 years old and he's still a baby. Maybe we can look into that for, slowing our aging down, or, maybe that's how they're looking at it too. It's just as a species whole too, which could be possible. The only 3 members of Yoda's species we know of is Yoda, Baby Yoda, and Yaddle from Phantom Menace. And they are all Force sensitive, so it could be the truth that, like you said, Matt, that maybe they all are Force sensitive, and that is why they're researching them. So Mando gets to use his flamethrower when he's breaking in here, which is just cool. Then he gets surrounded and he puts the child on the ground with his gun. And he uses the whistling birds, which are like little rockets that come flying out of his wrist and just know each target to hit. It was beautiful. Really awesome moment. He gets out of the building. And this is one of the best scenes, I think, just for suspense, is as soon as he gets out of the building, you start hearing those fobs start beeping. And you're in the cantina. And you just start seeing all the bounty hunters whose fobs start beeping, and Greef kind of has this look on his face like, I told him to walk away, and he didn't walk away, and he knows exactly what happened at that point. He gets, Greef and the guild go after Mando, and they block him from exiting, and he asks him to put the package down in the speeder, meaning the child. And Mando does this awesome move where he just walks over to the speeder, and then he quickly whips out his gun, shoots and dives into it, and tells the droid to drive, and kind of pulls a gun on the droid to drive. And then Greef shoots the droid, stops the speeder, and Mando just falls back to his old ways of disintegrating people. He just starts firing on them with that awesome disintegrating gun. And then we get kind of like this moment that was kind of foreshadowed a bit with down in the in the Enclave with all the Mandalorians, where the Mandalorians come to help. And the reason why they come to help at this point, I assume, is because they got on Mando about accepting the Imperial Beskar, and they didn't know about the child. They just kind of thought that he was working with the Empire. But I think with what Mando is showing them by kind of turning his back on the Empire in this way, by kind of sticking one over the client and helping the child. And this is just, this is something that a lot of people have always dreamed about, is just seeing multiple Mandalorians on screen fighting at once. So it's a really great scene. And again, you get Jon Favreau's Mandalorian character helping out and telling him, to keep going and that they'll have to relocate. And Greef kind of takes the hint here, and he just kind of disappears before anybody can kind of shoot him. And he's hiding on the Razor Crest. Mandalorian shoots Greef right where the Beskar steel was that he had got his cut. He knew exactly what he was doing there. We see a Mandalorian with a jetpack next to the ship. He acknowledges that he wants a jetpack as well, which is a little bit of foreshadowing. And then Mandalorian kind of, unscrews that little knob from the lever, hands it to the child for him to play with. And that is the end of Chapter 3, The Sin. And let me tell you, I always liked this episode when it aired, and I think for sure this is my favorite episode of the show. I guess we'll see as we continue watching it. But for me, it's just full of action. It's got tons of great lines, tons of great acting. And this is directed by Deborah Chow, who's going to be directing every episode of the Obi-Wan series. So this makes me incredibly pumped for her show. Overall thoughts, Logan, on this episode?
Yeah, I just like the end. I really do. I think the ending of this episode is probably the best. This one and the one with the droid when he first encounters a droid, and I think it's the first episode. Like, this one's clearly the best action scene, I think. Just, And I love the end when he's in front of Mando and he's, what is his name? I always blank on his name. Moff Gideon, isn't it?
The bad guy?
Yeah. No.
You mean Grief?
Yeah, Grief. Sorry. Whenever Grief is standing in front of Mando, and Mando's like, "You need to get out of the way." I just love the scenes that those two have together, just because they're so good, and that you can tell they like each other. They have this relationship, but you can also tell that they still don't trust each other quite. 100%. So this is a really good episode. I just like everything that's built into it. I like the flashbacks. Finally, you get those flashbacks of when he's a kid. You really start to understand maybe why he has a soft spot for the kid.
All right, Matt, your final thoughts on this episode?
I enjoyed it. This was really, I think, the first episode where I felt like the action was starting to pick up, and I didn't think I enjoyed it that much the first time. However, watching it last night, I realized the episode itself is a much better episode than I remember. And I do like that it's still set in that same area as the first episode. You get a lot of information really with the guild and with the Mandalorians himself, and you kind of see him interact with other Mandalorians, and you do kind of see where, I think you start seeing where the show is going to continue going, especially once he saves Baby Yoda, and then just seeing him do what he can against everyone trying to basically get Baby Yoda back for their own profitable reasons. It's a fun episode, and I did enjoy it a lot more than I remember watching the first time, and I think it sets up the rest of the series really well.
All right. Yeah, like I said, this is probably my favorite one of the whole show so far. It was, for me, it really makes me very excited for what Deborah Chow is going to do for Obi-Wan. But let's go ahead and wrap it up here. You can follow us on Twitter at PodAwakens, Facebook.com/PodAwakens, Instagram at PodAwakens, or email us at podawakens@gmail.com. And stay tuned for next week for our Chapter 4 Sanctuary recap. And may the Force be with you.
I have spoken.
It's over, Anakin!